This is Clean at Work with John Barrett and Sarah Bacca. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Clean at Work. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to have David Marquet with us. John and I are huge fans of his work. As you probably know, he was a top graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and commanded the nuclear-powered fast attack submarine USS Santa Fe, which is the topic of his book, Turn the Ship Around. His latest book is called Leadership is Language, in which he mentions clean language, and he currently works as a speaker internationally. Welcome, David.
Hey, thanks for having me on your show.
We do normally have a little woo. I think we should do our usual celebration for our speakers. We go, woo!
Woo! Woo! Made it.
Thank you for joining in, David.
So to get started, we were thinking perhaps for those who haven't had a chance to read Leadership is Language, you could give us a little bit of context about your concept, red work and blue work, that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, so I was a submarine commander, and my story is that by reversing the language structures that we had on the submarine, we achieved really incredible results. And when I say reversing the language structures, in general, leadership was about, what I was taught was leadership's about making decisions and getting other people to do what you want them to do. So there's an inherent coercive element in that. And I realized, especially after my introduction to clean language, which I kind of stumbled upon accidentally when I was doing research for Leadership as Language, I realized that even something as simple as a binary question, like, are you sure? Will that work?
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? When these things are about the future, they're little coercions, and what they're trying to do basically is get the person to take responsibility for the future, which is unfair.
Yeah.
And because people realize that, well, I'm not 100% sure it's going to work. I'm not 100% sure that there's a problem in this manufacturing process, but I'm 10% sure, and it's worth checking out even at the 10% level. And I was a huge language advocate on the submarine. Basically, we achieved what we did simply by changing our words. And I saw the impact of changing our words on our mindset. So for another example is on the submarine, we were having an after action report or an after action session on how we had done. And I kept hearing the word they. Operations would refer to supply as they. Engineering was referring to weapons as they. Officers were referring to the enlisted men as they. And we're all living in this tube. Like, if that could be a tribe, if that can't be a tribe, then no tribe can be a tribe. And I got upset and I beat my fist, said, there's no they on Santa Fe, which rhymed conveniently. I said, you got to use the word we. And I didn't preach anything about being a team. I never talked, oh, thou shalt be a team, thou shalt act as a team, thou shalt be one in your objective. No, I didn't. I just said, just use the word thee and we. And then we came up. And like the engineer would say, well, we ordered the wrong part. And it was mind-blowingly impactful. And it wasn't immediate, but senior officers who visited the submarine 6 months later would always comment on how it felt so much more like a team. Now, we have pretty good teams, but we really took it to the next level. And so I was a huge advocate of language. And it basically, in my research for Leadership as Language, I came to the conclusion that we've been programmed to speak an industrial age language, which is fundamentally coercive in its nature because of how we think about leadership in structural organizations. And I thought it was eye-wateringly genius.
Right. And you do mention clean language in your book, as we briefly said in the introduction. Where did that link come in?
Yeah, well, I was doing... I reached out to like Edgar Schein with a humble inquiry, and I was doing research on my starting story was I looked at the transcript of a container ship which went into a hurricane and sank, El Faro, in 2015. And by reading through that, I could see how the captain's words were little coercions. For example, hey, what should we call this? How about alpha, waypoint alpha? So that's a really minor thing, but he's not really asking a question when the captain is the person. And oh yes, of course we'll call it waypoint. So, and another interesting thing in that transcript analysis was, even though they knew about the hurricane, the National Weather Service had upgraded it to a hurricane, but the captain never uses the word hurricane. He calls it a storm, a depression, a low pressure area, and never uses the word hurricane. And all these things I thought really mattered. And so I came across a clean language book. And then as I was giving talks around the world, and I started talking about this new book I was working on, a couple clean language advocates would come up to me and they would help me learn more.
Yeah, you just got me thinking. I wonder if I took that transcript and just used clean language, which would obviously be quite extreme, and you do a scenario in the book where you go through it using the playbook that you created. I wonder what that would look like. I'm going to go back and do that after this.
I would love to see it. That'd be a genius move. My sense is we don't spend enough time in the details of the language. Just sort of as a society, we read the transcripts or the summaries, and we think that's good enough. And we really wanted to get to analyzing the language that teams actually use, not we hope they use, or we wish they use, or we claim to have used, but what we actually said in the moment. And so fortunately, ships like airplanes have black boxes which record the transcript. And I think these are very, very, very useful things. I sometimes get in trouble because I was analyzing, sometimes I look at public speakers or business leaders, and I was looking at some of Elon Musk's language. And I wrote an article which ruffled some people's feathers because I thought his language belied his true intentions. And this was with regards to worker safety at the Tesla factories.
Yeah, we talk in our classes about how the language that you use shows the invisible structure within your head. And once you start paying attention to it, it's really wild to hear.
Yeah, and I find myself falling short, and I feel like the time pressure and my previous programming, you just kind of get frustrated. And I just sort of give people the answer, and then it's so easy because then they just nod and we move on. But who knows if they're secretly not thinking that. I think related to it, and one thing that we teach groups is we call it vote first, then discuss. So imagine you're Boeing and you have to decide whether to launch 737 MAX as a product. And you can imagine, now we don't have the transcript, so I don't know what actually happened, but we do know that the CEO had gone public saying it was going to come out. We do know that there was intense competition between them and Airbus, and that Airbus had gotten the jump on them on a fuel efficient mid-size, the Airbus 320 and the 737. And we do know that there was generally a highly command and control structure. And we do know that headquarters was moved from Boeing, where it was near the engineers, deliberately away to Chicago. And it was being run by financial people and lawyers at this point. And so that's a perfect setup. Volkswagen, same situation, basically. And then we get what we get with a launch of a product that should not have been launched. And in retrospect, test pilots saying, hey, the thing is acting really, really squirrely in the system. And that any discussion ahead of time biases people to want to join the majority and join the boss's position and don't go against it. So we would vote first. Sometimes we use our hands. We go fist to five, or we'll just very quickly. I just stumbled upon it kind of accidentally as a submarine commander. It's like, don't talk about it. Everyone wants to tell their story. I say, no, we're going to vote. And so I'd have to control the meeting. I say, we're going to vote first. For all those who like, we're ready and we're going to vote. 0 means you want to go south. 5 means you want to go north. Very strongly in between is sort of lesser shades of enthusiasm for those two positions. Ready, go. And everyone would put their hand out. And then the phrase I use is embrace the outliers. So I would look at the people who felt most strongly and would invite them in to, okay, tell us why. And then the decision maker would have to make a decision. And it wasn't democracy, it wasn't about a vote. It was just about making a decision with full knowledge. I had a really interesting session with a pharmaceutical company. It's a brand new company, and they were making skin cream. It's the first product that just gotten approved, and they were having to decide what to price it at. And I was with the about 20 of the most senior people in the company, and we were just about to do this. And I turned to the CEO and I said, "Well, what do you think the numbers are going to be that people write on their cards?" And he was like, "Well, because normally it would be about $800 for a product like this. So low 600, high 1,000." And then I said, everyone wrote it on the card. Everyone flipped their card over. The lowest was 0. The highest was 2,000. So there's a lot more diversity in the group than we think. And we lose that when we preempt the discussion. So those are, I don't know, I'm not an expert in clean language, and I don't know whether this quote is a clean language rubric or not, but the whole idea that we have these micro biases implied in our languages, which then affect the other person's response, to me, it was really brilliant.
Absolutely. The voting first is one of the most cleanest approaches you can get, because what we're trying to do in everything we do is take the inference out of the situation. So we're trying to make sure that people own their own stuff is really important in the work we do as well. We generally use it in a team setting, David. So if you say something, we'll give it you back and say, "Yeah, that belongs to you, David. Okay, what about the next person? Okay, that belongs to you." And we'll facilitate a structure around that so that each of you can make sense of your own stuff, but you know that it belongs to you and not the other people. And it takes some of that bias away. But starting with that voting system is really quite cool. We have something in Agile as well, and in poker, because we're both Agile coaches as well, where the same thing applies, right? I think you talk about it in your book a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of Agile because Agile has this this ritual between my language is I call it red work and blue work. On the submarine, we talked about making the decision and then executing the decision. So we would want to have a very broad perspective while we were making the decision. So, for example, should we start the reactor? We want to look at all the different factors. Have we met all regulatory requirements? Have we done all the retesting? Is the team ready? We looked into their eyes and no one's got bloodshot eyes. And so there's all these things from local to global that we need different people's opinions because they're very complicated. And so each person is different, owns different parts of it. And so we need all that to honestly come out, not to hear afterwards, "Oh yeah, well, I knew there was a bit of a problem here, but I didn't speak up." But then once we did make the decision, start the reactor, and we open up the procedure, now we want extreme focus. We want to go A, B, C, D down the process, not A, B, C. Oh, well, D, we can't quite do that yet. So let's just skip ahead to E, F. No, that's not what we want. And so for me, the team, we needed to use our brains in two different ways. One was this sort of like, to me, it's sort of this, if you imagine like a prairie dog sticking up and like kind of scanning, looking left and right as an open water swimmer. It's when I'm raised my head up and I look around. But when you do that, your hips drop, so you go slower. So you don't want to swim like that. And then you put your head down, which your hips come up, you're flatter in the water, and then you can make more progress. And prairie dog sees a problem, they go back down. They're chomping on grass or whatever, and they don't need to worry about that. And there's this periodic oscillation, and it's not, I'm halfway in between. Yeah. And I hear people talk about, well, we're sort of purple. We're like sort of here. No, that means you're like bad at both. And when I learned about Agile, I said, well, this is brilliant because what we're doing is we're doing sprint planning where we're opening it up, the team's making a decision, and then we're diving into the sprint. And one of the key things I think that there is we incubate the team, and the leader doesn't get to come in and say, "Oh, I just had a great, I went to a conference and came back. Here's an idea. Let's go do that instead." Like, no, you can put in your notebook. We'll talk about it next sprint planning session. We'll stick it in our backlog and we'll decide. So, and I thought that was genius too. But I think this red work, blue work, as I started thinking about it and looking at examples, really applies to life from a very sort of moment by moment level to almost like lifetime scale.
Yeah, I did really like that bit at the end of the book where you really brought it back and kind of brought it back on me. I was like, oh damn, I thought it was just about the organizations I work with, and now you're saying, now you're saying I'm going to use it myself.
Yeah, I started. So the idea is think about it, think, do, and I was thinking. So my career was I went to Naval Academy, so I went to college. Quote, I got a couple master's degrees in there, but they were really sort of almost hobbyist side trips. They weren't really a fundamental shift in what I did. So I was in the Navy for 28 years, and then I became an author and a speaker, and I'm running my company. Now I've been doing that for, well, I guess 14 years. So I think the way our society is set up is we go to school to learn a bunch of stuff, and then we do it. We have a career. And because things are changing so rapidly now with technology and AI now, especially, what I learned in 1980 is not that helpful
Right.
maybe now. And so I was thinking, like, really, as a society, we need more shorter periods of red work. The more we teach, I was teaching a team one day, or we were talking about it, and say, are your sprint cycles the same throughout the entire duration of the project? Yes. Why? I don't know. We just easier to schedule it that way. So, well, that's not a really very good reason. And our approach is, I don't know, I'd be interested to see what you think. But our approach is you want more blue at the beginning, like the sprint, maybe only a week, because
Yeah.
there's so much variability. Let's make a vehicle. Is it going to have 3 wheels or 4? Is it going to be electric or combustion, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then as things narrow down, at the end, you want to over bias towards getting the thing done. So we have maybe 1 week, and then 2 week, and then 4 week, and then 8 week sprints kind of thing. And I was thinking about for life, well, gee, we kind of want to do the same thing. I don't want to go to school and then do something. And anyway, I think for me, I'm just feeling kind of a bit of an itch. I got to finish this one last book, but I think in the next year or so, I want to learn something different and do something different.
Yeah. I think that's something most agile coaches have in common is we're always like learning the new thing, getting a new certification because things change so much and we're such hungry learners. Like I try to like take a break because I'll overextend myself and I feel like an itch, like I have to read some new book or take some new class. I just can't handle it.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. I mean, this is not new wisdom. This is,
Yeah.
People would go on sabbatical, and there's language that kind of reflects this rhythmic approach.
Yeah.
I mean, even just day, night, act, quiet time. It's not exactly the same, but I think for me, like the evening is, I'm a little bit more reflective about, hey, how'd my day go? What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do better? What am I going to learn? What are my objectives? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it really resonate with me, especially, when I was growing up, it wasn't unusual for someone to stay in the same company for 20 years. And now it seems, maybe 3, 4, 5 years seems like a long time in an organization. So it completely made sense to use the red and blue brain thinking on myself. It was just a little bit annoying because, got to do some work now.
Yes. Yeah, because I think blue work is hard, like that reflection, that thinking and expanding, and because really being deliberate about embracing variability, it's really it's hard. And I think this trap of just going to binary questions: will it rain tomorrow? I mean, the weatherman kind of figured it out.
Yeah.
They would never answer that question. But I would see it in society: is the COVID vaccine safe? And then. And it's not really helpful. I think if you ask the question, how safe is it? You wouldn't see nearly as divisive a societal response as when you make it binary. No, yes. You really don't learn. And you actually don't learn anything. Whether the person says no or yes, I still am no smarter than before I asked the question.
Yeah.
I guess we're running out of time. And I was just thinking about language matters. I think that's where you started. So what tips have you got for our listeners about where to start with the change in this playbook?
Yeah, so for me, the focus is on the blue work, the thinking work, and the structure was industrial age organizations reserve the right of, quote, the leaders, the white collar, the college educated to do the thinking. And then the rest of us did the doing. And so it's that dichotomy. So, number one, just think about, like, why did I say it that way? Why did I run the meeting that way? But for me, the easiest start is don't ask a binary question. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, I think such and such. Will it work? Are you sure? Say, how sure are you? Just put that how at the beginning. And what you want to do is let people say, I'm 80% sure. You want, because the probability is what makes it safe to say, I'm sure. Because if it's someone says, well, I'm 20% sure, and it turns out that it didn't work, then we're not wrong. We're just, well, the 80% is what transpired. And so it's the not being wrong that allows people to then share more and think more. And then we get more ideas. You have brilliant ideas in your organization, but they're being trapped inside of people because they're afraid to say them because they don't want to. We live in an environment where you have to be sure it has to work or you never speak it. So number one is that, and then adding this probabilistic element. And then we would start also with observation. The safest place, people feel that description is pretty safe. So when someone comes up and tells you something that sounds wrong to you, just wade in with curiosity, but just start with description. Jumping to, well, what should we do about it is too often too big. And I jokingly go with audiences and I'll say, imagine you're boarding an airplane, like it's happened to me, and someone is jamming a suitcase into the overhead bin, and and they're trying to shut it, and it's not really working. And I've been on delayed flight because someone broke an overhead bin. You can't fly the plane. I don't know if everyone realizes that, but you're not leaving. And you say, like, well, I don't think that suitcase is going to fit. I pretty much guarantee you're going to get a number of responses, but one of them is not going to be, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. You might want to be leaning back when you say it too. But so it's really, I would just start, for me, is put the word how in front of your question. And then after you ask it, be quiet.
Yeah, that's tough.
Start with how.
Start with how.
That makes me think of our clean questions. What kind of, and is there anything else about? Those are two of my favorite because it's similar to the how. It kind of opens up the possibility.
Yeah.
What they've said.
Yeah. So how is good if you want, like, you're going towards a decision, like a probability, how likely is that to work? But I do also like what a lot, because what does exactly what you said.
Yeah. So as John said, we're about out of time, unfortunately. It went super fast. So if people want to learn more about your work, David, where would they go?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn as David Marquet, Marquet. I have a YouTube channel called Leadership Nudges on YouTube. And then I would point your audience probably to my book, Leadership is Language, which is carried by booksellers everywhere.
The audiobook's also on Spotify. That's how I listened to it. It was great. So thank you for joining us for this episode. Hopefully we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.